first, the biggest story of the week, the vote on airstrikes in Syria. Here's how our MPs lined up. Almost all the Conservatives in the region voted for action. Many of our Labour MPs voted with them, but some, as you can see, voted against. The veteran Conservative MP, Ken Clarke, abstained. So both of you voted for airstrikes, but Mark Spencer, was it a difficult decision?
Yeah, I mean, it was, to be honest. I mean, it is a really big decision to put your armed forces in harm's way. But for me, it was actually about trying to protect those innocent people in Syria that are being persecuted, raped, murdered, tortured every day. We have the ability to try and step in and help those people and take the fight to those that would do us harm in Syria.
Well, we hear a lot about MPs listening to their constituents. So did you canvass them, or did you search your own conscience before making this
some
decision?
and some, frankly. Obviously, I got a lot of correspondence in both directions from constituents.
And in Sherwood, what were they saying to you they wanted to happen?
I would say the majority that wrote to me said that they didn't want to intervene. But, that's when you take the whole population, it's actually quite a small percentage. But again, you have to listen to the arguments and you have to look at the data that you're being told. And for me, it is about making sure we're safer in the United Kingdom. And I think it was the only option at the end of the day.
Liz Kendall, you also voted for, but you took a lot of abuse, to be fair, for this, particularly on Twitter. You've been called things like a poisonous little Tory witch, worse than ISIS, a war criminal. What's it like having to face things like that?
Look, I always listen to the views of my constituents, and as Mark said, it was an unbelievably tough decision, the hardest I've taken as an MP, and in the end I supported action to protect people in this country, and for me also because of the UN resolution.
Do you expect to take that kind of flack though on Twitter?
Look, people
it's
have
personal, isn't it?
Yeah, but people have really strong opinions about this. Most people put it in a decent and respectful way. I'm big enough and tough enough to take some of the criticism that I've had, but what's really important is that people always feel they can do what they believe in. And for me, it was a matter of conscience, and I looked at the evidence, and I'm a person of principle, and I believe in showing solidarity with our international allies, and in the end that is the basis on which I took my decision.
I understand
you listen to people, but in the end you have to take that decision yourself.
I understand why, obviously that's the most important thing in this particular issue right now, but some MPs have even had death threats, they say, because of the way they voted.
It has got
it's beyond being a tough cookie, isn't it?
Nasty. I've never seen it be like this before, and my colleagues, no one took this decision lightly, and we need to stand up for our democracy here, and that people can speak their minds and say what they believe without those kind of appalling abuse and threats.
Do you enjoy, Mark, watching the Labour Party being divided as it has been this week? Or do you have sympathy with MPs like Liz, who's had to put up with this abuse?
I think some decisions are beyond, party political discussion, and this really was a national issue. It was about our national security, and I don't think it was about party politics at all. And clearly, everybody has the right, frankly, to criticise their MP or criticise a decision. But some of this has gone beyond the line, I think. And
what do we do about that? I mean, surely we should
I think clearly
change the way social media.
No, I think the police clearly have a role where some of those really do cross the line. When you're talking about death threats and threats of violence, then I think the police need to look at that and track those individuals down. And I think if they turn out to be members of a political party, then those political parties need to think about rescinding their membership.
But clearly you'd want action if that was the case,
yes,
wouldn't you?
And I'm glad to see that the Labour Party is going to be producing a kind of code of conduct for party members.
It sounds like your party really needs this more than ever, really.
Well, I've been disgusted with some of the abuse that my colleagues have had, and we need to take action. I completely support everybody's right to protest, but you can do that in a decent and respectful way. And, I call out people who send abusive tweets, and I'll report anyone who says they're a party member, because You know, we're a party that believes in equality and treating people with dignity and respect, and that is vital for our democracy.
OK. Well, now, from libraries to the homeless, more and more services which used to be carried out by councils are being run by volunteers. But even volunteer services don't come completely free. And a new report for Nottinghamshire County Council says many charities are facing a funding crisis. Peter Saul reports.
Chris Allen is just one member of an army of volunteers working across the region. He and others have turned this former coal mine at Newstead in Nottinghamshire into a country park.
Just a few years ago, I did have a bit of an issue with the old heart, and I was told to just keep doing what you're doing and see how far you can go, and it's keeping me fit. So, A, I'm trying to help things along, and B, it's doing me good too.
The old pit site was taken over by Rural Community Action Nottinghamshire, a voluntary organisation. It's the kind of place that used to be council run. It's a similar story for Alan Richardson, who has mental health problems. He spent 10 months on a council waiting list for social care, and in the meantime, volunteers have provided the help he needs.
Well, they help me with a lot of things, really. They help me like with phone calls to people and helping. Like, I'm not very good with a computer, so if like booking my driving lessons not long ago, I couldn't have done that. So they help me with things like that, and they've been to appointments with me and everything. They're really, really good. This last 10 months I've been working with them, they've done amazing. They've really changed my life. They helped me change my life.
The support comes from the charity Integritas, based here at the Nottingham CVS.
Social care don't provide the services that they used to provide. There's a big gap in support out there for people that need help with things like benefits, debts, housing issues, looking after their own health. Our current funding will run out in July at the moment.
At Nottinghamshire County Council, they're taking the issue seriously enough to commission a report. This report goes to show just how important the voluntary sector has become. There are now more than 4,500 such organisations operating in Nottinghamshire, and volunteers contribute £145 million a year to the local economy. But funding remains a serious issue. Just under half, 43% of the organisations surveyed said they'd survive less than 3 months if forced to rely on reserves.
I know that they're struggling, and there's not a great deal I can do about that, because whilst ever there's less and less money coming from central government, then clearly I don't have the money to give out as I would want to.
From social care to parks and increasingly libraries, volunteers are stepping into the breach. It calls to mind a political buzz phrase that's fallen out of fashion, the big society. But with money as tight as ever, something will have to give.
Well, joining us to discuss all that is Sarah Collis, one of the authors of that report on the state of the voluntary sector here in Nottinghamshire. Sarah, how bad is the situation for our voluntary charities?
I think it's safe to say it's bad. I don't think it's any different to how we've operated for many years, actually. I think we've had austerity one way or another within the voluntary sector for a number of years. But I think what's really shifting now is the level of the uncertainty that we're working within. And I think the short report that you just had then, in terms of what our report in Nottinghamshire has shown, is that the number of organisations that are working within really tight budgets and actually are using more money than they're actually receiving coming in is really quite frightening in terms of the sustainability of services.
I was going to say, because charities are so used to operating on a shoestring, really, but what's changed?
Yeah, we're really good at it, and I think that's the strength of us. I think, you know, we do more and more with less and less. However, I think what's really changed is that we are being put under increasing pressure to become much more competitive. I think we're being asked to look at competing in an environment in which we have very little support in order to compete, and I think that's putting more and more strain on some of the very small organisations. The report that we've published in Nottinghamshire shows that the majority of organisations working in the county are working on less than £10,000 a year, and what they actually achieve with that is incredible. However, when we're starting to look at large contracts that are being put out by local authorities, as more and more public services are being passed to the voluntary sector,
more pressure onto
it's
the
much more
charities.
pressure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Mark, a lot of people will be watching this and saying that, you know, the government can find money, for example, obviously the situation we find ourselves in most recently, to bomb in Syria, or £31 billion to cover an increase in cost for Trident. So when we want to, you can find money, but charities
and there is
are struggling.
there is money that comes to local authorities, and we've seen Nottinghamshire County Council there. I would say that there's over 10 people earning £100,000 a year within Notts County Council in their officer team. They're consulting at the moment in my patch about swapping all the dustbins in Ashfield. That's going to cost over £1.2 million to give everybody a new dustbin. Now, so if they've got the cash to do those sorts of things locally...
So you're saying that they've got their priorities wrong?
I think so. I think they can reevaluate that. I mean, I would echo some of the things that's been said. Some of these small charities are doing fantastic work on small budgets. Some of the larger charities, in my opinion, are sucking all of the money out of the system, and we need to find a way of getting more cash to those smaller charities that are actually giving more bang for their buck.
Liz Kendall?
The truth of it is, Mark, you know this, councils are having massive cuts, and the responsibility for this lies at the government's door. Our charities and voluntary organisations are being asked not just to add services but to replace them, and that's not on. Our voluntary groups are the glue that holds our communities together. The government could make different decisions. For example, I don't believe we should be having an inheritance tax cut that benefits a tiny few of the richest families at the top, when many of our brilliant charities and voluntary organisations that help the most vulnerable in society are going to the wall. It's just wrong.
These are not decisions that should be taken in Whitehall. These are decisions which are much better taken at a lower level, at local authority
but they're
level.
Being
They know
well, I would quite like to challenge in terms of obviously the county council at the moment in Nottinghamshire. It's Labour controlled at the moment. Unfortunately, when it was Conservative controlled, we saw the largest cuts to the voluntary sector that we'd seen in the country, over 60% cuts to the voluntary sector at that time. And that had a devastating effect. The number of organisations that actually went under at that time was horrendous. I think there's really something about how we work better with our local authorities to actually work together to understand how, if we've got less money in the system, how that money can be better used, and how we can work much more with our public services to re-engineer how we actually support the most vulnerable in our communities.
Because we saw, didn't we, that some of those vulnerable people, we saw Alan, and what happens to people like Alan, who's vulnerable, when cuts to councils mean that charities who'd normally pick up cases like his are struggling even more for cash. Where did they go then, Mark, when they've got
so clearly,
that not to turn to
we need
anymore?
to find a way of getting that cash through the local authorities. They need to make better decisions and support some of these charities. And I go back to the point about some of the national charities. To me, it feels as though they're sucking all of the cash out of the system with direct conversations with Downing Street,
Don't blame other charities.
No, I think it's frustrating when you've got major charities with central London buildings, who are frankly spending a fortune on rates there, when some of these smaller charities are much better wrong.
Liz Kendall?
Look, I'm really proud that, Leicester Council has got a new agreement with charities trying to work together better.
Well, you say that, but Leicester Refugee Action is actually going to close its doors later this month, isn't it? Is it time for the state to step in cases like that,
well,
where
as I
charities
said,
are having to close the doors?
I think that the government's got the wrong priorities. Our councils are working hard to try and support local charities. We've set up an emergency fund for those who are about to go to the wall. But simply blaming councils or large charities, I think, just tries to abdicate the government's responsibility for this.
And the same with just blaming the government and not looking to your local authority and whether they're being efficient with that taxpayers' money that's coming from central government, I think is an argument as well.
Sarah Collis?
I feel that we have to be much more strategic in the way that we fund the voluntary sector. I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that the majority of organisations are at the small end of the sector, and I think that's where we need to go.
Thanks very much indeed for coming into the studio. Now, an East Midlands town has been chosen for a national trial to change the way we deal with our food waste forever. People at Swadlincote in Derbyshire will be trying to recycle at least half the waste they produce in their kitchens. It's a £1 million project run by Sainsbury's and the local council, and it could mean street parties to use up excess food, using coffee grinds to grow mushrooms, and even mechanical noses that can smell when food is off. Des Coleman has been to Swadlincote to find out more.
Now, we live in a consumer society, but it's a throwaway one. More and more we are told to recycle, but here at Sainsbury's in Swadlincote, they are taking it one stage further.
times are tight for a lot of families in the area, and they don't want to be spending money and then it going straight into the bins. So, we want to deliver projects that are going to help them, and we're going to work with them, get ideas, share advice. We're going to do pop-up catering, etc., going into schools and teaching parents, guardians and children how they can do some cooking, and most of all, we're going to have a load of fun.
Thanks a lot. Now, the trial's been organised by Sainsbury's, who ran a national competition to find out where it should be held, and Swadlincote beat off 189 other towns and cities to be chosen.
Well, it was a great bid, so it wasn't only just the store, it's the whole entire community and the council which really get together. It's a community at the heart of everything they do, and everyone knows each other, so everyone got together and put in a really successful bid, and it went from schools to councils to governments to Rotary clubs, many more that put together a successful bid.
We try not to waste food. We have a budget, and we make sure we stick to it, and we plan our meals.
We throw things out that have probably gone a little bit mouldy in the fridge, but usually we use most things up.
Got any tips for people trying to save food?
Smaller portions for the children so they eat it up.
Before we go into shop, we plan what we want. If there's a bit left over for some reason, I'll put that in the fridge and keep it and make something the next day. Today I'm having homemade soup with leftover vegetables.
Okay, this project's all about food wastage. What can you do with this?
Right, so you've got things in your fridge, you don't know what to do with them. Our menu magicians will be at hand to give you some tips for using things that are coming towards the end of their date life, you're not sure what to do with them. So our project will combine fun, training, and also a little bit of common sense from environmental health professionals.
Now, the trial starts in Swadlincote in the new year, and you better get your artificial noses ready, because if it's successful, it's going to be rolled out across the whole country.
Des Coleman there. So big news for Swadlincote there, and some bigger news developing for the whole of the East Midlands in the last few days. This is the claim by some of our Labour councils that Conservative MPs are putting the East Midlands devolution deal at risk by delays and interference. Well, our political editor Tony Rowe has been following this story and is with us, of course, now. Tony, what do you know?
Well, this has all come out after the firing up of the so-called Midlands engine room on Friday. The Labour leader of Derbyshire County Council, Anne Weston, told the business secretary she had concerns that East Midlands MPs risk blocking the devolution deal. And her words have now been echoed by Nottingham City Council leader, Councillor John Collins. He says 19 councils have put together put their political differences aside to put together a deal which is almost there. And this is the important part of his statement. The party political involvement of a small number of MPs, he doesn't say who they are blocking a deal being concluded. And I think the indication is that there is some sort of gerrymandering going on over the issue of mayors, because without Leicestershire, it's going to be a Labour mayor.
Okay, blocking the deal. Very serious stuff here. Is there political interference going on, Mark Spencer? And are East Midlands Tories to blame? No,
I don't think they are. Frankly, what I'm hearing is people like John Mann in Bassetlaw saying they look to Sheffield, not to Nottingham and Derby. I think in Bolsover, they look to Sheffield as well. I think the High Peak probably looks to Manchester. And they're not looking to Nottingham and Derby. To me, the East Midlands is Nottingham, Derby and Leicester. It's the three cities. And I think if we could pull a package together, frankly, that involved those three great cities and the bits around it, then it would actually work much better. It would give us a real identity. Instead, we seem to be trying to cobble together something that just does not sit naturally together, like Chesterfield, Bolsover, High Peak. They're not Nottingham and Derby.
Liz, we've heard that some of the problems are being caused by Leicester's reluctance to be involved with this East Midlands deal. What's your take on that?
Well, I really hope that we put aside party political differences on this. I want to make sure. I hope it is, because I don't want to see us falling behind. I want to see us getting the powers that we need to make better decisions for people here. And I would urge everybody to do that, because if you look at other parts of the country, they're motoring ahead, they're getting more power over welfare.
Was saying that they were moving on very quickly, weren't they?
Yeah, but I care for my constituents that we can take decisions about support for local businesses, about welfare to work deals, about health and social care, right here, right now, because we make better better decisions locally. So I hope we can sort this out very quickly.
And Mark, let's be clear here, you're saying that you want Leicester on board with this?
Yeah, absolutely, because I think Leicester couldn't go on its own, or Leicestershire couldn't go on its own, and so if we're going to do this, then let's go all 3 cities and the counties around them and move this forward as rapidly as possible.
But that's what's been causing the delay, is that Leicester aren't on board as much as Derby have already moved ahead, if you see what I mean.
So we need to hold a hand out to Leicestershire and Leicester City and say, come on, let's get on board and really build a package that we can get some more power and cash to be spent locally.
Sounds a bit of a mess, really, Liz.
Well, I'm sure it will get sorted. I'm confident that this will be sorted out.
Within the time?
Yes, because ultimately we want to do the best for the people who live here. We don't want to lose out to other parts of the country. I want to attract jobs, investment. I want to get better support for people who are looking for work, and I'm sure all our politicians will put their heads together and sort it out.
Will it work out in the end, Tony?
Well, these are the first sign of cracks, and I think the concerning thing is that the East Midlands was first out the blocks when Manchester and the Northern Powerhouse was announced, and here we are still at the start line.